The Chinese are fed up with their own country.
China is on track to lose over 15,000 of its millionaires this year. This comes as the country already lost over 13,000 of them last year, more than any other country.
The affluent Chinese are escaping China. The youth are dreaming of escaping it. And the powerless are quietly suffering the communist oppression. Forget about the poor, even the richest ones have to go through hell, like this one.
Giving this speech that was critical of China's government, Jack Ma hasn't been seen in public, and now many are questioning, where is Jack Ma?
The situation is so bad that Xi Jinping had to make a public statement on May 4th calling on the country's youth to stay in China because the motherland and people need them most right now. But Chinese people are leaving the country because of the actions of Xi Jinping and his cronies. It was October 2020 at the Bund Summit. Jack Ma gave a bold speech criticizing China's financial system. But those words hit the powerful Chinese leaders like a slap in the face, who were right there, in the audience. What happened next was shocking. The Chinese government quickly took action. His companies faced massive penalties, and he lost more than half of his fortune. His company's historic IPO was completely shut down, and companies lost a staggering $850 billion in value. This was not enough. Because of government pressure, Jack Ma disappeared from the public eye for a staggering 5 years. Yes, not 1, not 2, but 5 long years. And ironically, they ask why people are fed up with the CCP. But there are 2 types of events. Ones that get a lot of media coverage, and the other one that doesn't. And the second one is more scary. The story of Jack Ma falls in the first category, but today we will be exposing the other side. CCP's harshest secrets that the media doesn't dare to reveal. So what are the CCP's dark secrets, and why are the Chinese desperate to leave China? Now, the CCP has censors working overtime in China to delete and censor any posts about this movement. I have my suspicions that the CCP's bots have always been disliking any China videos on YouTube in order to suppress it in the algorithm. So, if you guys can just take a quick second of your time and tap that like and that subscribe button down below, it helps me out a lot with this YouTube algorithm, especially when I'm covering topics that are exposing the CCP. Okay, let's begin. As we all know, China is an authoritarian government, and life under President Xi Jinping's rule has become increasingly difficult for many people. Strict government policies, crackdowns on free speech, and tight controls over businesses and media have left citizens feeling trapped. As a result, a growing number of people, especially from the middle and upper classes, are desperate to flee China. Although this trend has been growing for a long time, the CCP's extreme COVID-19 policies made it even worse. Prolonged lockdowns, job losses, strict restrictions, growing surveillance, censorship, and unpredictable policy shifts made life unbearable. The situation got insanely worse. Entire cities were sealed off. People were dragged into quarantine camps. And shockingly, there was no way people could criticize the CCP because online criticism was quickly deleted. But even that could have been survived. However, what happened next was the worst a country's people could face.
4 banks in China recently failed. Depositors fear they could lose their life savings. They have been protesting. Guess what the government did? Unleashed military tanks.
I know it's hard to believe with your own eyes, but what you just saw was real. In July of 2022, the CCP allegedly rolled out tanks to protect their banks. But from whom? Robbers? Gang members? Mafia? Well, from their own citizens who trusted these banks and deposited their hard-earned money in these banks. You see, Chinese banks failed, and depositors feared that they could lose their life savings. So the obvious response would be to withdraw their money, right? That's what these people did. And instead of calming the people and gaining their trust, the CCP rolled out the tanks. And when was the last time the CCP rolled out the tanks? If you've already guessed, it was the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre. It is impossible for me to even imagine myself in this situation. But those days are gone, and things are back to normal. That doesn't mean the Chinese are happy now. There are dozens of other reasons why they are still desperate to leave China, and were desperate even before the pandemic hit. Let me prove this. According to the United Nations, the number of annual asylum seekers from China was just 15,362 in 2012. It reached more than 100,000 by 2020, more than 120,000 by 2022. In fact, the total number of people applying for asylum during Xi Jinping's rule from 2013 has been over 613,000. This is a whopping 3,890% increase in asylum seekers during Xi Jinping's regime. While the numbers surged dramatically after 2020, they were already rising steadily even before the pandemic. The United States became the most popular destination, with 70% of Chinese asylum seekers applying there in 2020. Many first entered on tourist or business visas, then applied for asylum once inside the country. The introduction of 10-year visas for Chinese citizens in 2014 made it easier for them to enter the US, giving them a legal foothold before seeking protection. According to the UNHCR, an estimated 176,000 Chinese nationals are expected to seek asylum in 2024. This surge reflects a dramatic 169% increase compared to 2019, before the COVID-19 pandemic. Australia alone received over 15,000 asylum seekers last year, while countries like Canada, Brazil, South Korea, and the UK have also witnessed a sharp rise in applications. Surprisingly, not only from ordinary Chinese people, but even some of China's high-profile citizens are also seeking asylum outside of China. For example, Gua Guang Chong, a blind human rights activist, made a daring escape from house arrest and sought refuge at the US Embassy in Beijing, eventually securing passage to America. Yu Zhe, a writer known for his criticism of Chinese leadership, endured hardship, detention, and beatings before finally fleeing to the US in 2012. Decades earlier, Feng Lizhi, a key figure in the Tiananmen Square protests in 1989, found himself trapped in political turmoil and lived inside the US Embassy for a year before being granted safe passage out of China. But did you notice one thing? We haven't even touched on the people leaving China for better opportunities and a better life. We've just talked about asylum seekers, the ones fleeing their home country due to fear of persecution, violence, or danger. But why would so many Chinese seek asylum in the first place? I mean, it's not just about a better life, it's about the safety of their life. Well, if we discuss all of the examples, this would be a 5-hour-long video. But one of the most famous examples is Hong Kong, which is also facing the consequences of China's tightening grip. After the massive 2019 pro-democracy protests, the government cracked down on activists, journalists, and ordinary citizens. Many Hong Kong residents are desperately trying to move to countries like the US, the UK, Canada, and Australia. And a significant number of them were asylum seekers. But only a handful of them are fortunate enough to escape the communist hell. Most of them keep suffering for almost forever, and the only thing they have is hope. The hope of getting out someday. But why do asylum seekers have to suffer a lot? Because escaping isn't easy. Many countries have strict asylum policies, and Chinese asylum seekers often face hurdles like high standards of proof, long processing times, and limited acceptance rates. This makes it incredibly difficult for them to gain asylum. For example, the US has seen a significant rise in Chinese asylum applications. However, approval rates are very low due to tighter scrutiny because applicants must prove a credible fear of persecution under tough legal standards. And why shouldn't they leave? These Chinese have every possible reason to leave CCP-ruled China. Some of the stories are so terrifying that they could send shivers down anyone's spine. One of them is the story of Gua Guang Chong. Don't be surprised when I tell you that Gua isn't an ordinary worker, but a billionaire who was also known as China's Warren Buffett. In 2015, he vanished from public view, sparking widespread speculation. Later, it was found that Gua was detained by anti-corruption police for some investigation. Not surprisingly, no details were provided for this investigation. In fact, when Gua reappeared a few days later at a company meeting, he stayed silent about what had happened. To this day, we still don't know if his disappearance was really about anti-corruption, because if it were, why was everything kept a secret? You know what I mean? This isn't the first time a Chinese businessman has faced trouble for criticizing the government. Since Xi Jinping became president in 2013, several wealthy entrepreneurs have either disappeared or been punished. Because the world kept seeing the same pattern repeat, one incident after another. In 2017, billionaire Xiao Tianhua was relaxing in his luxury hotel in Hong Kong, until he mysteriously vanished. Later, it was revealed that Chinese security guards had abducted him. In 2022, he was sentenced to 13 years in prison for fraud and corruption. Then in 2020, real estate tycoon Ren Zhicheng spoke out against Xi Jinping's handling of the pandemic, calling him a clown. For this, he was sentenced to 18 years in prison for corruption. I think he should have called him Winnie the Pooh. That way he could have at least escaped. And the latest case was of Bao Fan, a billionaire tech banker who went missing in 2023. Later, the government claimed he was cooperating with an investigation, but no one really knows the full story. And remember, these are just the cases that made headlines. we still don't know about the victims who quietly disappeared without the world ever finding out. These incidents are a clear message that even China's richest and most powerful businessmen are no longer safe. Their sudden disappearances have left the entire business community living in fear, because no one knows who's next. This fear is driving a mass exodus of Chinese people, including millionaires and billionaires. And this is actually good news for other countries. You see, rich Chinese are leaving China in record numbers. In 2024 alone, 15,200 millionaires and billionaires are expected to move out of China, which is 10% more than in 2023 when 13,800 left. According to Henley & Partners, most of these people are heading to America and Singapore. They are also taking a huge amount of wealth with them, anywhere between $30 million and $1 billion per person. But this story has a different side. Even after getting asylum, their life is not worry-free. They face harassment and threats, not from locals, but from someone they already expected. In some cases, the pressure is so intense that giving up on life feels easier. Why do I say this? Because even for those who manage to escape, the fear doesn't end. Many Chinese dissidents who flee to countries like the US, Canada, and Australia continue to face harassment and intimidation. Some have reported receiving death threats, while others say they've been blackmailed or confronted by Chinese agents in their new homes. In fact, the Chinese government runs a secretive program called Operation Fox Hunt and Operation Skynet, which it claims are designed to track down criminals who have fled abroad. But in reality, these programs have often been used to silence critics of the Chinese government, even in foreign countries. But you might think there are millions of Chinese outside of China, so all of them are critics and risk their lives criticizing the CCP? In this graph, you can see the number of Chinese citizens in different countries. So why are millions of them abroad? This is because the majority of them are not asylum seekers, but migrants who moved for better opportunities and a higher quality of life. This is despite the fact that China has lifted millions out of poverty, became a manufacturing powerhouse, and achieved an economic miracle in just a few decades. Well, because the reality is changing very fast, and the world is not even noticing it. You might say that, come on, everyone is noticing updates on China, right? They are bad people and would obviously want to leave China after this, right? Well, actually not. I'm not talking about the recent headlines China is making, but rather the actual reality that barely makes any headlines. The harsh reality only the Chinese know. But what is this reality, and what is making the Chinese leave their own country? In fact, this desperation is clearly visible with more and more people searching for ways to emigrate, with how to move to Canada and immigration options becoming common search terms in China. Apart from this, a new trend online called run has emerged in China. It is a Chinese slang, which sounds like the English word run, but refers to people actively searching for ways to move abroad permanently. This phenomenon gained traction during the stringent COVID-19 lockdowns in early 2022, prompting widespread discussions on Chinese social media platforms. For many, this is not just about improving their economic situation, but also about escaping political and social restrictions. Guess what? The CCP has ruined the plans of emigrating too. How? By limiting passport renewals, tightening visa approvals, and imposing strict travel restrictions. So the Chinese, already facing a nightmare in their own country, are now barred from leaving it too. And why nightmare? If we check the economical situation of China, before 2019, China's economy was growing steadily at around 6 to 7% annually. However, the COVID-19 pandemic disrupted this growth. In 2020, the economy dropped to just 2.3%, one of the lowest rates in decades. Although it rebounded to 8.4% in 2021, it fell again in 2022 to just 3% due to the zero COVID policy and strict lockdowns. This economic downturn also impacted the job market of China. As if economic shocks weren't enough, China's madness made the job market even worse. China destroyed some of its biggest thriving industries. For example, the CCP banned for-profit tutoring for school curriculum subjects, banned subject-based tutoring institutions from listing on stock markets or from raising funds. Although the intention of this move was to lessen the academic burden, this sudden move resulted in a huge job loss. Most of the players in the tutoring sector lost almost 90% of their market value in less than a year. Companies laid off almost 40 to 50% of their staff. If we just consider the top 7 listed companies, 206,000 people lost their jobs. In fact, these are just figures of the listed entities. We've not even considered the brick-and-mortar classrooms, the small businesses. We are talking about just a single industry. Because the CCP has also cracked down on real estate, tech sector, and the gaming industry. But as you might have guessed, this led to the shutdown of hundreds of businesses and the loss of thousands of jobs. Businesses are shutting down. People are losing jobs, and when they look outside for hope, even that path is blocked by the CCP. In fact, the situation is so bad that in August of 2023, the Chinese government released a shocking piece of data according to which a record high of 21.3% of Chinese youth are unemployed. Even the overall unemployment rate was just 5.1% in 2024. Seeing these numbers, the CCP thought that this is horrible, and they decided to eradicate such horrible numbers. In fact, they did, by suspending the future publication of the urban youth unemployment rate for 6 months. Yeah, that was the typical Chinese solution for it. But when China started publishing it again, it was not less than a miracle. When it published the latest numbers after 6 months in December of 2023, it dropped significantly to just 14.9%, and it became stable at 15.7% as of December 2024. So how did China manage to pull off such a miraculous move? Actually, with a simple trick. It simply adopted a methodology to exclude students from December of 2023. This new methodology does not include university students anymore, which simply means the actual unemployment situation might be worse than what the numbers show. So China was extremely cautious about the unemployment issue and was taking every measure to hide the issue. But at such an extreme level that literally no one was even allowed to criticize it. I mean, no one is allowed to criticize on any issue in China anyway, but this one was actually very disturbing. 55-year-old Zhu Hongpeng commented on China's slowing economy and questioned Xi Jinping's leadership. But surprisingly, he didn't make these remarks in front of large crowds, which obviously no one would dare to do. But instead, he made these remarks in a private WeChat group. Since then, he has vanished since April of 2024. Yeah, that's the freedom of speech China has. And let me tell you, Zhu Hongpeng wasn't just an ordinary guy. He is the deputy director of a very reputed government think tank. In fact, the level of China's frustration could be understood by the fact that Zhu is no longer listed on the think tank's website, and websites related to his work have been taken offline. Also, a commentary about China's weak consumption, unemployment, and dispirited youth by a chief economist of China, Gao Shanwen, in 2024, was removed by China's internet censors. And why wouldn't they not censor his content? The facts and figures Gao presented literally exposed the ugly tricks of the CCP. But what was so sensitive about their content that China wanted to hide it from its people? According to Gao, about 47 million migrant laborers who have left the cities, gone back to their home provinces because they can't get jobs in the cities, have disappeared from the unemployment data, because the data only captures unemployment in urban areas. So this means that unemployment data is much worse than what we saw earlier. He also mentioned that the GDP has been overreported compared to real GDP by 3 percentage points per year over the past 3 years. That is from 2021 to 2024, totaling a cumulative overestimation of about 10 percentage points. He said that older people are full of vibrancy, younger people are lifeless, and middle-aged people have nothing to live for. But why would he say that? Actually, he stated a weird fact, that consumption growth is stronger in provinces with older populations, and weaker in provinces with younger populations. Sounds a bit counterintuitive, right? But this is because older people are spending more because they are getting regular pensions, but younger people are holding back on spending because their expectations on income are diminishing. So while unemployment is high, those who do have jobs aren't much better off either. Many are stuck in brutal work culture known as the 996 system, where they work from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week, and this is a whopping 72 hours per week. China's labor laws set a 44-hour work week, but many companies, especially in tech, ignore these rules. Employees often follow the 996 schedule, that too without any overtime pay most of the time. Frustrated with this high-pressure lifestyle, more young professionals are leaving major cities like Beijing, Shanghai, and Shenzhen for smaller towns with a slower pace of life. Beyond work-life balance, younger workers are also fleeing high living costs and an uncertain job market due to China's slowing economy. This harsh work culture is driving a mass exodus of Chinese professionals to leave to countries like the US and Canada in search of better opportunities and a more balanced life. This is why the youth are emigrating for better education and jobs. The wealthy are leaving in search of a more peaceful life, and those still in China are getting creative. I mean, getting creative with protests, like this one. This was the time when China imposed a strict rolling lockdown in Xinjiang to contain COVID-19. Under the zero-COVID strategy, people were forcibly quarantined, supply chains collapsed, and essentials like food and medicine ran short. Public frustration grew. But authorities censored complaints and arrested critics for spreading rumors. But soon, everything got out of control after a deadly incident. On the 24th of November, 2022, a fire broke out in an apartment in Urumqi, Xinjiang's capital, killing 10 people and injuring 9. Video showed fire trucks unable to reach the building, and many blamed the zero-COVID policies for blocking rescue efforts. Authorities denied responsibility, but social media posts claimed residents were locked inside due to strict COVID rules. The next day, protests erupted across China. People held blank sheets of paper as a symbol of censorship, leading to the movement called the A4 Revolution, or White Paper Protests. Now, why was this genius? Because blank paper didn't show any banned words, so the AI couldn't detect it. That meant human moderators had to manually find and delete the images from social media platforms, making it much harder and slower for the government to censor everything. This way, this movement got more reach and awareness in China. And guess what? It worked. Despite police crackdowns, the people succeeded. Authorities lifted lockdowns in many cities, and on the 7th of December 2022, the Chinese government officially ended the zero-COVID policy. But sometimes situations can get really bad for the people. So bad, people have to literally come out on the streets to get access to their own hard-earned money. In April of 2022, 4 rural banks in Henan, China, suddenly froze deposits worth $5.8 billion, affecting over 400,000 people. At first, banks claimed they were upgrading systems, but it was later revealed that a private investment company had secretly worked with the bank employees to attract deposits using high interest rates of up to 9%, far above China's legal limit of 3 to 4%. The banks had loaned large sums of money to real estate projects, but when those loans failed, they couldn't return depositors' money. The suspected company behind this fraud controlled at least 13 rural banks and runs over 100 shadow companies. As depositors remained locked out, over 1,000 people protested in July, forcing authorities to promise partial repayments in batches with conditions. The crisis also spread to Anhui province, where officials announced similar measures for another rural bank. Due to this incident, rural people in China lost faith in the country's banking system. On top of that, human rights concerns have also contributed to the desire to leave China. In Xinjiang, the Uyghur Muslim minority has faced severe persecution. According to China's 2020 census, over 11 million Uyghurs live in Xinjiang. More than 1 million Uyghurs have been detained in what the Chinese government calls re-education camps. Hundreds of thousands of people have been sentenced to prison, while many Uyghur women have been forcibly sterilized. Thousands have been forced into labor in state-controlled factories and farms. Religious practices have been banned, and many mosques and cultural sites have been destroyed. International human rights organizations have condemned these actions, but China has denied any of these allegations. So people chose to flee their country, sometimes legally and sometimes via illegal and the more dangerous routes. For many Chinese citizens looking to leave their country, one of the most popular and legal ways is through investment visas. The EB-5 visa program in the United States has been a top choice for wealthy Chinese individuals who want to settle abroad. This program allows people to invest in a U.S. business in exchange for a green card, and eventually U.S. citizenship. Over the years, Chinese investors have dominated this program. In 2022 alone, more than 6,100 out of the 10,855 EB-5 visas issued in the U.S. went to Chinese applicants, more than 50% of the total. In fact, from 2010 to 2019, over 70% of all investor visas issued by the U.S. were granted to Chinese citizens. But it's not just business investors who are leaving. Chinese students are also applying for U.S. visas in large numbers. In the first half of 2023, nearly 45,000 Chinese students received F1 visas to study in the USA, which is a 44% increase compared to the previous year. By the end of July, more than 80,000 student visas had been issued to Chinese nationals. But for many Chinese nationals desperate to leave, legal migration through visas and investment programs isn't always an option. Some take extreme risks, traveling through dangerous routes in search of a better life. One of the most treacherous paths is the Darien Gap, a dense jungle between Colombia and Panama, known for its harsh terrain, deadly wildlife, and criminal groups. Despite the dangers, more Chinese migrants than ever are attempting this perilous journey. In 2023, over 25,000 Chinese migrants crossed the Darien Gap, making them the largest group outside the Americas to take this route. The total number of migrants through this jungle reached 500,000, according to the Panamanian government. Once they survive this brutal crossing, they continue north towards the US-Mexico border, where around 37,000 Chinese nationals were detained last year. Many young Chinese people, inspired by social media, have begun referring to this journey as zhou cian, meaning take the risk. Unlike many other migrants from Venezuela or Haiti, some Chinese travelers opt for VIP routes offered by smugglers linked to Colombia's largest drug cartel, the Gulf tough clan. These routes, though still dangerous, are quicker and less physically demanding, including boat rides, guided hikes, and even horseback travel. However, they come at a high cost, making them accessible only to those who can afford to pay. For many Chinese citizens, leaving the country is not just a choice. It's a battle against government restrictions. While people in most countries can apply for a passport easily, in China the process has become increasingly difficult, especially those from Xinjiang, Tibet, and certain minority regions. The Chinese government has placed strict exit controls, making it hard for people to leave legally. Although a passport application officially requires only an identity card, authorities have created extra barriers, forcing people from certain regions to submit extensive documentation and wait for years, only to face rejection without any real explanation. But still, in 2024, approximately 23.32 million passports were issued to Chinese citizens, reflecting a 26.5% increase from the previous year. A surprising incident happened in 2016. The situation became even worse when Xinjiang authorities confiscated all previously issued passports as part of a government crackdown. At the same time, China introduced another policy. Government employees, including teachers, doctors, and university staff, were forced to hand in their passports for safekeeping. If they wanted to travel, they needed special approval, which was often denied. The government claimed this was to prevent corruption and protect state secrets, but in reality, it was a way to control people's movements. Also, one of the most powerful tactics is to threaten family members who still live in China. They tell dissidents, "Come back willingly, or your loved ones will suffer." Many people, terrified for their families, feel they have no choice but to return. According to reports from the U.S. Justice Department and investigative journalists, Chinese agents operate secretly in many countries to track, intimidate, and sometimes forcibly return Chinese dissidents back to China. Instead of arresting people openly, these agents use fear and pressure. This cross-border crackdown isn't limited to individuals accused of corruption. Human rights organizations like CNN and Freedom House have reported that China has pressured governments in the Middle East and Asia to arrest and send back Uyghurs. Chinese agents have also been accused of kidnapping dissidents in Southeast Asia and intimidating government critics in Europe. One shocking case involved two Chinese activists who'd been granted UN refugee status in Thailand. Zhang Yafei, a political cartoonist, and Deng Guangping, a human rights activist, have already been jailed in China for speaking against the government. Fearing for their safety, they escaped to Thailand and were officially recognized as refugees by the United Nations. But despite this, Thailand arrested them at China's request and put them back on a plane to China. A third man, Swedish citizen Gua Guang Chong, was also on that flight. He was a publisher of books that criticized China's Communist Party. Before his forced return, he had already been missing for weeks. His disappearance sent shockwaves through the international community. The United Nations condemned Thailand's decision, warning that men faced serious human rights violations in China. Amnesty International also spoke out, revealing that Zhang Yafei had been tortured by Chinese authorities in the past. Now he was back in their hands. Despite these reports, China defended its actions. Its foreign ministry insists that these individuals were criminals, though it has never clearly stated what crimes they committed. In Hong Kong, media freedom is under attack. Two editors from Stand News, one of the last independent news outlets, were arrested and charged with sedition. Their trial was a clear sign of just how far the government would go to shut down anyone who spoke out. These cases prove that criticizing the Chinese government, even from another country, can be extremely dangerous. Dissidents, refugees, and even foreign citizens who speak out against China's policies risk being hunted, kidnapped, or forcibly returned. For those who flee China hoping for freedom, the reality is harsh because even miles away, they are still being watched. But still, it is way safer than living in China. It's not just Chinese citizens who are leaving. Foreigners living in China are also packing up due to these strict policies, growing censorship, and rising anti-Western sentiment. Cities like Shanghai and Beijing, which were once major international hubs, are seeing a steep decline in foreign residents. Shanghai's foreign population dropped by 20% in a decade, while Beijing's fell by 40%. Despite the growing desire to leave, the Chinese government has made it increasingly difficult for citizens and even some foreigners to exit the country. Between 2016 and 2022, the number of legal cases mentioning exit bans increased eightfold. In 2018 alone, 34,000 people were prevented from leaving China, a 55% increase from the previous year. A study found that between 1995 and 2019, at least 128 foreigners were also subject to exit bans, including 29 Americans and 44 Canadians. These restrictions have raised concerns that people who are seen as critical of the government may not be allowed to leave. You may be surprised to know that in addition to exit bans on travel to and from China, there are restrictions on money transfers for Chinese nationals. They can transfer only $50,000 per year. This makes it difficult to invest abroad, pay for foreign education or real estate, support families overseas, or relocate wealth for emigration, especially during times of economic and political uncertainty. Another reason which leads to migration of Chinese people could be the mandatory military service service amid conflict with China and Japan. China has both mandatory and voluntary military service, and in 2021, voluntary service became the main method for recruitment. However, all citizens are still required to serve if called upon, and military training is mandatory in high schools and universities. Also, the risk of war over Taiwan is growing, and many young Chinese men fear being forced to join a war if conflict erupts. So the point is, you have to be good in the eyes of the CCP. If you are not, then you face the consequences. You see, China's government has also tightened control over online content, restricting access to international news and social media. The Golden Shield project allows the state to monitor and censor online discussions. Criticizing the government can have serious consequences, as authorities continue to roll out a controversial social credit system that tracks people's behavior. Those with low scores could face travel bans and other restrictions. So what does this brain drain mean for China? Back in the 1980s and 1990s, China was poor, and many of its best and brightest students went abroad to study, and they never came back. The United Nations recorded the highest migration out of China in 1992, with over 870,000 people leaving. But as China grew into an economic and tech powerhouse, the numbers started to drop. By 2012, net emigration had fallen to just 125,000 people, a huge decline from earlier years. The Chinese government actually encouraged its talented people to return home, offering incentives to scientists and skilled professionals. And this strategy worked. By 2016, more than 80% of Chinese students who had studied abroad were returning to China, compared to just 25% 2 decades earlier. But now that trend has flipped once again. In 2022, over 310,000 people immigrated from China, despite strict passport and travel restrictions. And in 2023, within just 9 months, the number had already reached the same level as it was the entire previous year. This means that more and more talented individuals are looking for a way out. Meanwhile, many tech professionals are choosing Canada and European countries. Why? Because these countries offer better work-life balance, stronger social benefits, making them more attractive for those looking for a stable and safe life. This brain drain, or the loss of talented people to other countries, could be a big problem for China. In the past, China depended on its smartest minds to fuel its economic growth and technological advancements. But if too many of them leave, China might struggle to maintain its position as a global tech leader. For now, one thing is clear. More and more Chinese professionals, students, and workers are looking for a future outside their homeland. Only time will tell if China can successfully attract them back to the country or not. Thanks for watching. YouTube just dropped a mind-boggling announcement. It is paying creators $64 million per day. Why? Well, because YouTube doesn't have enough creators. That is why you see videos on your homepage that have less than 1,000 views, like this one. Now, of course, that doesn't mean everyone should start a channel, but if you have ever wondered about starting a YouTube channel, or a faceless YouTube channel like this one, well, now's the perfect time. YouTube is paying creators millions every day, and it's pushing newer, smaller channels now more than ever. But I'm sure many of you have questions on how to get started and how to grow a channel. We get questions in our email all the time from some of you guys. So that's why we've decided to put all of our YouTube advice into one training bootcamp for the low price of completely free. So, if you're someone interested in starting your own YouTube channel, you can sign up for this bootcamp by clicking on the link in the description or on the screen. Sign up now because, unfortunately, unlike YouTube videos, the bootcamp is like a Zoom call, so it's limited to just 100 people. Okay, let's get back to the video.